Welcome to the debate. Today we are looking at Taylor Swift's Evermore. And I'll state my position right now. This was the moment the greatest pop music machine of our generation assassinated her own top 40 formula in cold blood to become a pure, isolated auteur.
And my position is that she simply put on a plaid coat to build a highly optimized collector economy monopoly.
Which is just such a cynical way to look at an act of pure artistic compulsion. I mean, she walked away from the noise, dropped the glossy, mathematically engineered radio pop model of Max Martin, and just wandered deep into the woods.
I understand the romanticism in your view. I really do. But it is incredibly naive to confuse a perfectly calibrated monetization engine with like a spontaneous campfire acoustic session.
It's not naive to recognize when an artist prioritizes atmospheric storytelling over easily digestible hooks. She didn't want a massive, exhausting marketing campaign. She just wanted the quiet isolation of winter to create.
You're looking at a multi-million-dollar corporate pivot and calling it poetry. The whole concept of a sister record isn't some profound artistic serendipity. It is a masterclass in risk-free commercial survival.
Risk-free? She completely abandoned autobiographical songwriting.
What she actually did was recycle the wildly successful sonic and visual aesthetic of her previous album, Folklore. She sustained massive momentum without having to shoulder the multi-million-dollar overhead of building a completely new visual era from scratch.
You're trying to reduce genuine artistic bravery to a corporate spreadsheet. And frankly, you're missing the actual music. Look at what she walked away from.
She didn't walk away from anything.
Yes, she did. Her strongest commercial asset for a decade was autobiographical songwriting. Essentially selling the media's curiosity about her personal life. With Evermore, she completely forfeited that ego.
I wouldn't exactly call it forfeiting ego.
She shifted to intricate architectural character studies. Take a track like Champagne Problems. It's not a catchy radio anthem. It's an emotionally devastating dissection of a rejected proposal told with profound empathy.
It's still meticulously crafted to trigger an emotional response, though.
Of course it is. It's music. Or look at Nobody No Crime, which is a fully realized country noir murder ballad. She built these worlds using mellotrons, alto clarinets, and chamber pop orchestration.
Right. The indie alternative costume.
It's not a costume. You don't utilize an alto clarinet if your goal is to manipulate the Billboard charts. You use it because you are prioritizing the heavy, complex weight of the narrative over whether a teenager can dance to it on TikTok.
Well, an alto clarinet doesn't suddenly absolve an album of its commercial ambitions. Let's be brutally honest about this. Sound curated by Aaron Dessner and Bon Iver. It was a beautifully tailored musical costume, worn for a very specific purpose.
Which was what, exactly?
Securing institutional prestige. And it worked brilliantly. She locked in another Grammy Album of the Year nomination. But to claim she wasn't thinking about consumer behavior or the charts, that's simply ignoring reality.
I'm not ignoring reality. I'm looking at the intention.
The surprise drop wasn't a rejection of capitalism. It was a highly weaponized tactic. By bypassing the traditional 3-month single campaign, she short-circuited consumer psychology.
Oh, so now releasing music without a PR blitz is psychological warfare.
It created instant, unavoidable FOMO across the entire internet. I mean, it guaranteed a Billboard #1 debut with 329,000 equivalent album units in its first week. She didn't escape the machine. She just found a faster, more explosive way to run it.
But you're conflating the result with the intention. Just because a masterpiece happens to sell well doesn't mean its genesis was greedy.
It wasn't an accident.
The music on Evermore is far too stubborn, far too difficult to be explained away by your marketing theories. If we want to talk about sound, we really have to talk about closure.
Ah, yes, the metallic clanging track.
Listen to the production on that track. They utilized a no-input mixer, a piece of equipment where you literally feed the machine's output right back into its own input to create a harsh, uncontrollable feedback loop.
Right. The Messina processing.
Exactly. They combined that with the Messina processing to warp the vocals, laying it all over this jarring, asymmetrical percussion. It sounds abrasive, like you said, metallic clanging.
Which is exactly my point about sanitized indie music.
How is that sanitized? It was specifically built to simulate the ugly, jagged, unresolved feeling of a fake friendship collapsing. No calculated pop star obsessing over their streaming metrics allows their music to sound deliberately hard to listen to.
I hear you pointing to the feedback loop enclosure as proof of risk. But let's take a step back and look at the whole board. What you're calling gothic folk authenticity is just indie music sanitized for the stadium.
Sanitized for the stadium? That's absurd!
It's the truth. Underneath those modular synthesizers and lap steel guitars, the core structural math of the songwriting is still perfectly optimized pop music.
It's really not.
And if she was truly so committed to being abrasive and alienating the mainstream consumer, how do you explain Gold Rush?
Because Gold Rush isn't a compromise. It's a sonic representation of the lyrics, the feeling of...
Let me finish the thought on Gold Rush, because you cannot ignore who produced it. She specifically brought Jack Antonoff back into the fold for that track.
Jack is a longtime collaborator.
And he delivered a gleaming, hook-driven, perfectly polished pop moment. It didn't just accidentally wander onto the track list. It was purposely planted there as a shock absorber.
A shock absorber.
Yes, it's an insurance policy. It ensures that the mainstream consumer, the one who might get a little spooked by the no-input mixer feedback on closure, doesn't completely abandon the album.
That is such a clinical way to view art.
It's textbook corporate risk management. You include just enough weirdness to secure glowing reviews from music critics praising your bravery, but you make absolutely sure to keep a blindingly bright pop hook in your back pocket.
You're reducing Antonoff's presence to a commercial safety net, which entirely strips the song of its narrative purpose.
The narrative purpose serves the commercial safety net.
No, Gold Rush is about the blinding, intoxicating fantasy of desiring someone everyone else wants. And then the sudden, sobering realization that you don't actually want the anxiety that comes with it.
And it just happens to be incredibly radio-friendly.
It needs that bright, propulsive tempo to mirror the rush of a daydream, just as it needs the sudden stops to mirror waking up. But even if we disagree on the production logic, there is a true cornerstone of Evermore that your cynical business framework completely fails to dismantle.
I'm listening.
It's the spiritual weight. You cannot explain away a song like Marjorie with a business plan.
I'm not saying the emotions aren't real. I'm saying...
No, really listen to the architecture of Marjorie. She takes the concept of grief, specifically the regret of not asking your grandparents enough questions when you had the chance, and turns it into a conversation across time.
It's a beautifully written song. I concede that.
She pulled archival recordings of her late grandmother singing opera and layered them into the backing vocals so that they are literally singing together. That isn't a product they versified for a demographic.
It's a highly effective emotional anchor.
That is an agonizingly vulnerable piece of adult devastation, and the way this album has survived in the culture proves it transcends marketing. Look at her current Eras tour.
I was waiting for the Eras tour to come up.
While Evermore secured its own permanent, dedicated era on the setlist, the fans fiercely protect it. They view it as the forgotten masterpiece, the quiet sibling that speaks the truth about the collateral damage of growing up.
And that right there is exactly my point.
How? It created a sacred space for pain.
I will grant you that the emotional resonance of Marjorie is profound, but the fact that it hits so hard emotionally is exactly what makes the commercial machinery behind it so terrifyingly effective.
That doesn't even make sense.
You just called it the forgotten masterpiece. That perception, that is the illusion at the absolute center of the Evermore business model.
So you think she faked being overlooked?
I'm saying the perception that it's a quiet, overlooked, sacred space is precisely why it sells so ruthlessly well.
How can the perception of being overlooked drive sales? That's a contradiction.
It's not a contradiction. It's a brilliant exploitation of the collector mentality. Let me walk you through the reality of the physical merchandise strategy.
Fine. Let's talk about merchandise.
You think fans are protecting a sacred space, but let's look at the June 2021 vinyl surge. 6 months after the album dropped, long after the initial surprise wore off, Evermore suddenly rocketed back to the #1 spot on the Billboard 200.
Because people love the album.
Because of physical vinyl sales. She sold 102,000 vinyl records in a single week. That was, at the time, one of the biggest weeks for vinyl in the history of the streaming era.
Buying physical media is a way of supporting the art. It's a rejection of the ephemeral nature of streaming.
People aren't buying 2, 3, or 4 copies of the exact same record in different color variants because they are quietly grieving to Marjorie. They are buying them because they are trapped in a highly optimized fan economy.
Trapped. That's incredibly condescending to the fans.
It's gamification. It's the deliberate withholding of content to manipulate engagement. Look at how she handled the deluxe tracks, like Right Where You Left Me.
A fantastic song, by the way.
She didn't put it on streaming services right away. She locked it exclusively behind physical CD purchases. If you wanted to hear the complete artistic vision, you had to pay premium physical prices.
Which is totally normal for a deluxe release.
Then, weeks later, once the physical sales started to dip, she strategically drop-fed those deluxe tracks onto streaming platforms. That is a calculated, algorithmic IV drip.
You are confusing the delivery mechanism with the art itself. The fact that the distribution was well managed doesn't retroactively corrupt the writing process.
It restarts the engagement cycle all over again. The emotional vulnerability of the music is the bait, but the hook is pure, unadulterated capitalism.
Artists are allowed to sell their art. An artist cannot hypnotize 1 million people into buying a vinyl record if the underlying material is hollow.
I didn't say it was hollow. I said it was calculated.
The success you're framing as predatory manipulation only works because the music legitimately anchors the listener. She wrote a song like Ivy, a song dense with banjos, trumpets, and trombones that explores the agonizing, creeping nature of infidelity.
Again, excellent songwriting deployed flawlessly as a product.
She wrote Tolerated, which perfectly captures the suffocating silent tragedy of pouring your entire soul into a relationship with someone who merely endures your presence. You can't workshop that in a marketing boardroom.
You can't workshop the lyric, no, but you can workshop the packaging.
What she proved in 2020 is that in an era where the world rotates on 15-second TikTok sounds, she can hold a listener's attention for an entire hour of complex, literate, challenging music. She traded the easy victories of pop culture for literary permanence.
But the way she packaged that literary permanence is exactly what I'm talking about. I'm not denying her talent as a lyricist, but look at the product diversification.
Diversification? She literally just worked with their friends remotely.
She took the exact same core production team, Aaron Dessner, the Long Pond studio ecosystem, and simply swapped the mood board. Folklore was the escapist, misty summer.
Because it was recorded in the summer.
So to ensure the second product had a distinct marketable identity, Evermore became the tragic, freezing late autumn and winter. It's brand differentiation at its finest.
That's just naturally how seasons work.
When she was doing the minimal press she did for this album, talking to Zane Lowe or Jimmy Kimmel, she kept repeating the same specific talking point. We just decided to wander deeper into the forest.
Because that's literally what it felt like creatively.
No, it's world building as a substitute for a traditional press tour. She knew that during a global pandemic, when everyone was trapped in their homes, the imagery of a lone poet wandering through the desolate woods in a trench coat would trigger a massive psychological response.
So now wearing a trench coat is manipulative?
She calculated that selling the aesthetic of isolation would be far more profitable than standing under the spotlight in a sequin leotard.
You talk about this aesthetic of isolation as if she was sitting in a penthouse mocking her audience, but the creation of this album was genuinely decentralized and stripped of ego.
Stripped of ego by hiring the biggest names in indie music?
This was remote recording across multiple studios during a global crisis. Look at the collaboration with Justin Vernon on the title track Evermore. That isn't just a feature for streaming numbers.
I mean, it certainly helps the streaming numbers.
The way their vocals interact. The way the song violently shifts tempo and mood right in the middle, dragging the listener from a depressive November gray into this frantic, breathless realization that pain isn't permanent. That requires a complete forfeiture of control.
Forfeiture of control is not a phrase I'd ever associate with this artist.
She had to step back and let Vernon's erratic piano dictate the climax of her own album. Or look at getting Marcus Mumford to sing uncredited backing vocals on Cowboy Like Me, just to add texture to a song about two con artists falling in love.
Uncredited, but heavily publicized after the fact.
She shed the skin of the biggest pop star on the planet. shrank her own footprint, and let the music breathe without her ego suffocating it.
Shedding her skin? Or just putting on a different uniform to make herself bulletproof to critics?
Wow. Bulletproof to critics.
Yes. Bringing in institutional indie darlings like Justin Vernon, Marcus Mumford, and Matt Berninger isn't an ego death. It is the strategic renting of artistic credibility.
Renting credibility? She doesn't need to rent credibility.
She didn't shrink her footprint to join their world. She hired their world to serve as the scenic backdrop for her play. Let's look closely at a track like Long Story Short.
That's a great upbeat track.
If you strip away the acoustic guitars and the understated synth bass, what is left? The melodic core is a massive, major label pop song about her 2016 public relations crises.
The production completely changes the context, though.
Structurally, it is exactly the same artist from the 1989 or Reputation eras. It's just wearing an indie rock disguise. That is the true business genius here.
It's not a disguise, it's an evolution.
She didn't abandon the pop machine at all. She just painted the machine matte black, scuffed it up a bit to make it look vintage, and used it to capture an entirely new demographic of listeners who normally pride themselves on hating mainstream pop music.
You are so obsessed with finding a hidden commercial agenda that you are completely blind to the agonizingly raw beauty of what is actually happening.
I'm just looking at the mechanics of the release.
You cannot fake the quiet, haunting serenity of Evermore. You cannot buy it, you cannot strategize it, and you certainly cannot simulate the profound chill of an album that genuinely contemplates the endings of things, the end of love, the end of life, the end of eras.
I never said she faked the emotions.
To transition from the vibrant, pastel-colored, stadium-shaking anthems of Lover to the bone-deep winter chill of this album required a genuine leap of faith.
A carefully calculated leap of faith.
Imagine being at the absolute apex of global fame, possessing the formula for guaranteed radio domination, and choosing instead to sit down and write about quiet betrayals, grandmotherly grief, and the ordinary tragedies of ordinary people.
And selling millions of units doing it?
By endlessly dissecting vinyl sales, color variants, and chart algorithms, you are stripping away the fundamental, undeniable truth.
Which is what?
Going Into the Woods proved once and for all that she does not need the exhausting, superficial machinery of the music industry to be the greatest, most emotionally resonant storyteller of our time.
I'm not the one stripping away the truth. You are the one who has completely surrendered to the bedtime story she deliberately spun for you.
It's not a bedtime story, it's the music.
You are sitting here arguing that she proves she doesn't need the industrial machine while ignoring the blindingly obvious reality right in front of you. She didn't defeat the machine. She didn't escape it. She is the machine.
That's just incredibly cynical.
The true, terrifying genius of Evermore isn't that she bravely fled the music industry to sit by a fire in the woods and write poetry. The genius is that she built an airtight, flawlessly executed commercial empire that convinced millions of people to pay premium prices, week after week, variant after variant, just to watch her pretend she did.